Hi. So today I'm going to play Better Days by Dermot Kennedy. Sometimes I think we need a reminder that as much as it's awesome to live in the moment, we do need to think longer term sometimes. And sometimes when things feel challenging in the moment, we need to remember that good things are still coming. So I like Dermot Kennedy. I love his voice. And this song is definitely a two-hand song. Like there is definitely a rhythm beat to it, but I'm going to do it the way that I normally do it and just give it a go because, again, I think it's a great song. And I think we just need a reminder that good things are still out there. So there's only five chords to it, but there is quite a bit going on. It is sort of the same progression, like repeated. So we're just going to give it a go. I hope it turns out to be easy, just nice, fun to play song, but we'll see how it goes. Come along for the ride. This episode may seem strangely timed since I sat on it for a bit, but the overall message of hope is relevant any day, whether it be a good day or a bad day. The intro, it says you have to do it twice, but it's only showing one on the tab, but we'll figure it out. So we're going to chill out a bit today because I think it's really needed. To me, this song is like a brine line that runs under an ice pad to keep the slab cold. Sometimes I think it's really important to try to cool ourselves before complaining about the heat. Not saying I'm one to judge about that at all because I've been known to be a bit spicy myself on occasion. And sometimes the PTSD can overseason my emotions a little bit. Not an excuse, but it is a bit of a reason, and it's why I am open about how I try to manage that, just to make it easier on the environment a little bit, with hopes that that way it doesn't feel as much as like a walking on eggshells kind of environment for other people, which can be a thing when there's someone with PTSD and you're surrounded by people who don't have a similar experience or have dealt with a similar experience in a different way. And honestly, there are worse problems to have. I'm not going to be mad or hold it against someone for not being traumatized. I'm happy for them that that's their experience. And that's not to come from a place of like demanding that certain things never happen either. It's more, in my personal experience, what I try to do is more, here are the areas where I am overly sensitive, and a little extra mindfulness would be helpful in certain situations. Reception kind of depends on the personal experiences with the people that you're asking for that mindfulness from, because if they don't necessarily understand, they won't see the value in how meaningful little actions that could be helpful would be. And because it's something I've worked so diligently on over the last few years to try to manage, it's not about never having a moment when everything just boils over, because that does sometimes happen. I've just learned the importance of sorting through my own thoughts and actions before it gets to that point. By learning to do that, I've been better able to recognize when I'm reaching my max before I get there, which I like to think has helped prevent a lot of those boilovers and allowed me to navigate situations much better with a much clearer mind. Like I said in the previous episode, sometimes all we can control is our own actions and emotions. The better handle you get on those, the more equipped you'll be to face your personal challenges with a confident strength, in my personal opinion. Again, I can only speak from experience. I get there's a lot going on right now and a lot of animosity. I cannot stress enough the benefits of a healthy, constructive dialogue about topics that challenge your own beliefs, and it can increase our mutual respect for each other, or at least get us to a point where we're better able to agree to disagree. Some things are just misunderstandings, so if you're able to talk it out with someone, it's important that you do, because you may not be as misaligned as you think about certain situations. What happened to compromising for the most peaceful outcomes? where there's a benefit for everybody rather than everything being measured in terms of wins and losses. In a lot of cases, everything can be a win-win or a lose-lose depending on how you approach the situation. Because I'm not sure why there's so much focus on labels and categorizations. Maybe I just approach the world in too much of a kumbaya sort of way. I usually try to stay pretty center on the spectrum of beliefs, but maybe that's why I'm so misunderstood. People can still be good people and have different views than you. Say it again with me. People can still be good people and have different views from me. I've found it helpful in stressful situations or times of uncertainty to take some time to sit and reflect about where it is you really hurt, because that helps you better navigate your own feelings on a situation. Yeah, that can definitely be hard, and there is an element of personal accountability to it as well, which is also not fun. But for me, I didn't truly know what was important to me until I really got to know myself. Then I could understand the gap between what I was hurt about and be able to better map out the steps I'd need to take to work to heal that wound, which would then ultimately put that aspect at a higher vibration. It's allowed me to make better decisions, and definitely from a more calm and longer term headspace than I would have been able to do previously. And when I say long term, I should clarify that too. It can mean a whole lot of different things, and there are different levels of zoom, so to speak. There are multiple potential bigger pictures stacked inside of each other, like an inception type deal. It depends on the nature of the situation and what kind of outcome you're looking for. I find sometimes when problems are challenging and finding solutions can be tricky, it's best to zoom out a bit, because I personally find more commonalities that way. For example, if you only look at things as black and white, you will only ever see things in shades. But when you add the spectrum of color, there are a number of additional possibilities in between. But if you only focus on the two shades, you might be limiting yourself from finding your favorite color. I'm using that analogy because I think of life as art. It's the course that I'm having a hard time with. Okay, let me do a dry run through. Why is that complicated? The same can be said for getting to know people. On the surface, it can be easy to believe there are no commonalities in a lot of things, a difference in understanding, but really, that only applies to certain aspects. I find that by zooming out of the perspective of which I'm approaching the situation, focusing more on the broader scope, I find it much easier to find that common ground, and there's a better ability to foster at least a mutual respect or understanding, even if it's not full on agreement. Baby steps are still ones towards progress. It's just a matter of patience and commitment to growth and learning. But that works the best, and progress is much quicker if both sides have that same level of commitment to that growth and understanding, and can talk about it in a healthy, constructive way where the goal is to work towards a resolution. I spent a lot of my life feeling lost. There were a lot of days where the only thing that kept me going was telling myself that tomorrow might be better. It was enough to keep me going, even on days that were extremely difficult. I still do when I feel lost, because it's not like I never feel that way. I feel that way all the time. And I'd be lying if I said that there weren't times that I even took steps backwards. To be absolutely fair, I've spent a lot longer in those negative spaces than I now realize I needed to, because it took me forever to realize it was me that had to do the next steps. I was always waiting for my circumstances to change rather than the change starting with me. Now I just make my little pocket of the world brighter when and where I can, and try to continue to operate with love, compassion, and understanding no matter the circumstances. Sometimes it can be difficult, but it's still worth it to at least try. The toughest challenges require the most love in order to overcome. So close on the chorus. I almost had it. Let's start at verse 2. I'm not sure if it's true for everyone, but I think at the time it was for me where I was in a worse headspace, that I was so focused on comparison and feeling behind, but I was just waiting for something to come along. I wasn't doing the work I needed to get to where I wanted to be or who I wanted to be. So I was feeling like I wasn't living up to that version. But that was an unrealistic expectation and way to look at it because I wasn't vibrating high enough to reach a new version of myself. But when I learned to differentiate what I thought I wanted versus what I actually wanted in life, my perspective changed. I was able to make steps more aligned with that best version of me that I wanted and still want to be. And once I felt like I wasn't forcing life anymore, it was much easier to flow into a higher alignment. The more work I did on myself, the more I felt like I was being pulled out of my comfy little black hole. Even despite the harsh circumstances, there were definitely opportunities for learning and growth. When those opportunities arose, I had to choose the path of growth. I had to choose the path of love and compassion in order to take some steps forward. Suddenly, the black hole wasn't so dark anymore. Not for other people's lack of trying, though. Do I still have spicy moments? Yes. But overall, my calmness and decision making when facing challenges has significantly improved. But 2019 me is still pretty pumped about the progress that I've made to this point, even if I do have moments where I falter or make mistakes, because I'm still committed to learning and growth. Why does that move so quick? In a lot of ways, I'm much happier than I used to be. Even if I'm being constantly stalked, harassed, put on blast, and mostly in fear of my life because apparently it's entertaining to others, sometimes life works in mysterious ways. That's where faith and trust come in. Especially because life continues to demonstrate that nothing is ever as it seems, and life is unpredictable. God's always got a plan. Faith is putting one foot in front of the other and knowing that it's going to be okay. Like I said, life, God, both work in mysterious ways. Based on everything that's happened since this all started, I made a bunch of good calls by deciding to end some of the relationships that I did when I did. I would have been worse off if I hadn't, especially since they're largely responsible for everything that's unfolded and every challenge and hurdle I've had to overcome in the last few years. In some cases, much longer than that. As hard as that can be, it's important to me to have quality relationships over quantities of relationships. And it's important to take time to grieve the loss of relationships that you're no longer contributing energy to. I've taken some tough losses of a lot of people that I always thought would be large parts of my life for always, or made some sort of positive impact in my life. I'll always carry pieces of those relationships with me because they were significant for different periods of time in my life. And I'm grateful for it now. Even if I'm not in a great position and it's caused a lot of hardship for me to cut a lot of those relationships off, I've learned that my personal demons thrive in times where I'm deepest in grief. So I really try not to stay in that space for too long. Instead, I try to acknowledge what the root feelings are that are causing that grief and working from there. But that's what I mean about zooming out for a better perspective. If I were to just focus on the grief aspect and the loss of that relationship, there's not much I can do. But there's usually something within why I feel that grief so deeply and a healthy way to take a step in processing it. And again, this is something that I apply to like every kind of relationship in my life. Maintaining connections that you've outgrown can be draining on your energy. And in my case, a lot of the people that I walked away from, we'd really been drifting apart for, in a lot of cases, years at that point, and prevents connections that are more aligned with your current vibration from coming in. This one was a really hard one for me to learn because a lot of the people that I ended up cutting out were people that I had known for a long time. Like, I had really prided myself on a lot of these long-term, don't even know that your story's gonna change, just wait for better days. connections, but when I looked at the quality of those connections over time, I just outgrew a lot of them. And that's fine. That happens with age and life experience. There wasn't any animosity towards any of them or anything. It's just we're on different paths, or we had different feelings, or there was certain compromises that we just couldn't make, and we didn't need to maintain as close of a connection that we once did. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. Things can be done in a healthy way, and you can wish people well and just move on with your life. Not everything has to be a fight all the time. I find it also helps determine which relationships are worth fighting for. Generally, if it turns into a blame game over and over and over again, that's usually where I draw the line. To me, that signifies that there's no intent to compromise or find a resolution, because then the emphasis is on an individual win rather than a win for the partnership. So when I talk about zooming out, an example I can use is the grieving process around my dad's death and how it's been nothing like I had expected it to be. There are a couple of big factors of why I think that is, though. A lot of it had to do with my reference points were just different. Most of the guides to parental grieving I had were based on those who were older with aged parents and longer lives lived with their presence. Also, keep in mind the type of community that I lived in. Having divorced parents wasn't very common at the time all of this was happening, which added another layer of relational complexity to it. Even if I could find someone who had gone through a similar situation with a parent at the same age, it was a little bit more challenging because I didn't live with my dad. So his absence wasn't as noticeable in every day as it would be for someone who was actively living with theirs. My dad might have understood how I felt because he lost his dad younger too, but he wasn't around. It was 5 years after mine was gone that my mom lost a parent, and their relationship was much more strained than me with my dad, who we were coming to a really good place in ours after some really rough years. There was a really weird time in between high school and college that I didn't think too much about it. Then all of a sudden at 26, when I bought my house, I got hit with all the grief I feel like would have made more sense at 14 when it happened. It lasted a while and was just as challenging to navigate because for a while I couldn't figure out how to explain it or why it was happening. And a lot of it just seemed like the most trivial things would make me sad. But when I zoomed away from I'm sad I lost my dad and discovered because he's going to miss all the things a girl calls her dad for as she's trying to find her way in her adult life, it changed my perspective on the whole thing. That's when it hit me. The tunes we'd never jam out to together, the sports we couldn't watch, the refs we couldn't yell at, how I was so close to a good fishing spot and we couldn't just roll out on the boat on a Sunday morning before football, not being able to help me fix stuff around the house or just random phone calls. I always knew he wouldn't be there to see it if I got married or had a kid. He'd miss all the big moments. That part I had come to terms with a lot earlier. I had graduated 3 times and garnered quite a few achievements and accolades that he wasn't physically in the stands for, but on multiple occasions he did make his presence known over the course of the years. But it did become those little moments that were the root of the grief when it did hit down the road. I didn't expect it because it seemed like so much time had passed that it didn't seem reasonable. And at the time, I didn't have the mindset that healing isn't linear. I guess I didn't think about it as something that happened a long time ago could still have an impact on a current situation, because generally you deal with those things as they come, but something like this would be more of an evolving situation because ultimately he was around for less of my life than he would end up being here for. Like I said, healing isn't linear, and in my case, there were some things I was too young to understand or even consider at the time. Once I had that experience, though, and found the root of the issue, processed my emotions in a healthy way, or as healthy as I was able to with the resources and tools that I had at the time, and think of something I could do in the moments that I missed him the most, I was able to come to a more complete place of healing with that wound in my life. That's not to say I never grieve it still. It comes in waves, and I definitely still have moments. The other morning, I was missing him a bit, so I went to the cemetery to say hey to him and my grandpa, as I tend to do when I feel like that, even though one's been gone for almost 25 years and the other almost 50, and I never got to meet my grandpa. So this is a sort of thing that helps ease that sense of grief for me. To just go and have a chat for a few minutes doesn't usually have to be long. What I didn't expect on this visit were to find indications of, we'll call it some sort of dig, which, I don't know, kind of weird if it was done legally and his only child didn't know about it. Also, he was cremated. The kitchen witches must be kitchen witching again. Like, I want to be mad that the people that are trying to ruin my life are now resorting to digging up deceased family members, but I'm still trying to get over the absolute absurdity of it all. Like, actually depraved behavior. So I was hit with a different type of grief. Moments of laughter in the face of challenges can be really good transitional moments as far as mindset goes. Like I've said before, it's important to think of better days and to put one foot in front of the other. I don't have to feed the grief. I don't have to feed the anger. I don't have to feed the hopelessness. So, I mean, with stuff like that going on, just gotta keep bo peeping for the sheep before they end up on Jezzy's drawers. The need for spiritual protection is at an all-time high, and the dark thrives on trauma and grief. So even when things get tough, it's important to maintain a loving, hopeful, and optimistic approach in proceeding. It's important to strike a balance between childlike wonder and naivety because it's easy to get sucked in. I personally think that's a downfall of toxic positivity too, because if you never acknowledge that bad things can happen, then it seems that much scarier. But if you acknowledge that, yeah, sometimes shit happens, sometimes that's the first step towards not being so afraid of something, is just acknowledging that it's a possibility. And then you don't feel so caught off guard and you do feel more equipped. Sometimes it's just a matter of being grateful for the little things and the little moments. Like I've said before, glimmers. How small those things need to be in order to provide optimism really depends on how extenuating the circumstances that created the need to rely on that moment was to begin with. There's always a silver lining, even in tough circumstances, and having a little faith that tomorrow has the potential to be a better day. As I mentioned in pretty much every episode, to me, everything is pretty much about perspective. My whole situation has been the most interesting, repeated display of it. To some people, my life sounds awful. Depends on what you're looking for. Although I'd say the situation is beyond less than ideal, I'm alive, currently, not for anyone's lack of trying, but shout out to God's Grace JC and the ancestors on that one. Maybe some grave disturbing haters. Not to say nothing hurts. Like I said, make sure to take your time to grieve, and healing is not linear. So it may and likely will come in waves, and that's okay. It's really just important to not stay in that space and instead try to transmute that into something positive through a healthy outlet, like something creative. Further to that, I think it's important to acknowledge that you can feel the feelings without always having to take action on those feelings. I think it's important to make that distinction and also to remember that feelings can also depend on how you're feeding them. Oh, I missed it in that same spot. Your story's gonna change, just wait for better days. You've seen so much of pain, now you don't even know that your story's gonna change. Just wait for better days. I found historically I tended to gravitate towards things that were angry when I'd be in those spaces. It made me feel more sullen, and those hopeless feelings were intensified. But when I fed it more with positive feelings and zooming out to see the bigger picture a bit more, it wasn't so intense. Even if my feelings were more able to shift the focus to, you know what, it's going to be okay. Having faith is knowing one day that will be true and everything will work out as God intended. It's rough for a minute, probably longer than a minute, but you'll feel better when it passes. It just never fully passes without putting in some effort to get through it. Your story's gonna change, just wait for better days. You've seen so much of pain, now you don't even know that your story's gonna change, just wait for better days. Ah! By having a healthy outlet for the moments you're really feeling your big kid feelings, you can transmute that energy into something positive rather than something negative. But it requires a shift in a perspective. You can feel love just as intensely as you can feel anything negative. Shaping or having an impact doesn't need to look like intolerance, screaming, and violence. There are better, more peaceful ways to convey the feelings if the true goal is for positive change and greater community impact. That's why keeping an open dialogue with multiple perspectives is important. It can help diffuse situations before they reach a point of escalation. I've also learned that I don't need to scream to be heard. And if I'm in a position where I feel like I have to, then even if they're listening, they're not necessarily willing to hear. In all honesty, my better days seemed to glimmer through when I started putting that lens on everything. I've learned the importance of energy conservation. It just means knowing what's worth investing energy into. You can have all the conversations in the world, but there is a difference between someone listening and someone hearing. This is a pet peeve style rant for me, but I'm not going to get into it right now. Essentially, if you're just listening to respond, it's not the same as listening to understand. And if you're not trying to understand, then there's going to be no comprehension throughout the conversation. So the cycle just repeats over and over, and there's not necessarily a resolution, and that is not a constructive conversation. It's draining, it goes nowhere, and for me, staying in situations like that or getting stuck in those loops just isn't worth the energy. So I think to have a constructive conversation, you need to be willing to hear the other person. Change is a choice and involves a level of personal consistency, which admittedly I'm not always great at myself, but I can honestly say that the progress I've made involved me remaining committed to my journey of personal growth and knowing that it's always a work in progress. 5 years ago, no one would have believed I could have made the progress I have. Many told me it wasn't something I could maintain. And I'm not saying that that's not a possibility, because there are definitely days where I falter. Every day is a choice. Each one is a small step toward a better version of yourself, and eventually it's incorporated into the versioning. But again, I cannot stress enough the importance of operating with good intentions and in love with empathy and compassion, and treat others as you want to be treated. Because I've also learned that the times that feel the most dim is when love and light is most necessary. And all we can do is hope better days are coming and wish Godspeed for Ray J. Okay, well, that one is fun to play, but it is a little bit harder than I expected it to be. For as simple as the progression is, where it changes is really throwing me off. There's a couple spots in the bridge, and then there's a part in the chorus, the last line of the chorus, that I get a little messed up on. But overall, it's pretty fun to play. I found that this one was good for learning how to keep time. So, because for a lot of the song, it really is a note per beat. So, it's been good to practice that way and getting the movements down. I found that it helped me memorize the verse parts a lot better. So, you know what? Practice makes better. maybe eventually one day I'll figure out how to really play, but I'm happy with how I did for tonight. And again, it's just a nice song to remind yourself that sometimes things are hard, but tomorrow always has the opportunity to be a better day. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, keep the peace and keep rocking on.